Hey team, Coach Jim here. What I want to talk to you today a little bit about was functional threshold power, lactate threshold, aerobic threshold, anaerobic threshold. It's kind of all in the same bucket. What it is, if you were to go out and ride for 60 minutes, you get your average power, your average heart rate for that 60 minutes, that's your functional threshold. If you're going to go out and run for 30 minutes, your hardest maintainable effort, you get your average power, your average pace, your average power, your average heart rate, that's your functional threshold pace and power for running. What it means is anything below that functional threshold is aerobic. Your muscles work. The byproduct of working muscles is lactic acid. Your muscles can efficiently flush that lactic acid when you're below your threshold. When you go out there and you work at those harder intensities above your threshold, you're anaerobic. Your muscles build up that lactic acid too quickly. It can't get flushed. The muscles get flooded with lactic acid and you have to back off your effort. What we want to do is find your functional threshold power on the bike, your functional threshold pace on the run. So then we can prescribe efforts within training and racing that align with your functional threshold. This is key to racing. If you're going outside of your ability levels and you're performing an Ironman at 90% of your functional threshold, you're not going to make it through that bike ride, or you have a really tough time running. But we know if you go into an Ironman and you go on your bike and you perform 70 to 75% of your functional threshold, as long as you're fit and you've done the training, you're going to have a great bike, and that's going to lead into a great run. So it's vital that we know our functional threshold and the percentage of efforts and how those align with your functional threshold. There's a few ways to find the functional threshold on the bike. Number one, you can go out and ride uninterrupted for 60 minutes as hard as you can maintainably complete. You take your average wattage, you take your average heart rate, that's your functional threshold power, that's your functional threshold heart rate. Programs such as Zwift, TrainerRoad, Sufferfest, they have their own functional threshold tests, such as the 20-minute threshold test, where you ride as hard as you possibly can, or hard as you can maintain for 20 minutes, take the average of that, multiply it by 95%, because you're not riding for an hour, so you have to take in consideration of that, and that gives you your functional threshold power and heart rate. Another way is the ramp test that these programs have built into them, where you ramp up every minute until you can't pedal any further. It spits out a number, which is usually approximately 75% of the top number that you hit in that ramp test, and that's your functional threshold. So there's several ways to do the functional threshold test. You have to find a way that's convenient for you and that you can knock out in an efficient manner. On the run, you go out and you can run, do this on a treadmill. You can do this outside on a flat surface. You go out, you run 30 minutes at your hardest maintainable effort. You take your average pace, you take your average heart rate, and that is your functional threshold pace and heart rate on the run. You make notes of these. And as you progress in your training and as you get stronger and fitter, those thresholds come up. So you can hold higher paces on the run. You can hold higher power on the bike, and those subsequent zones below come up as well. So whereas you're holding 200 watts at 70% at the start, all of a sudden you're holding 220 watts at 70% a few weeks later. So this is where the training is vital, and your focus on those percentage of efforts really comes into play. So pay attention to your threshold, figure out those threshold numbers for yourself, and repeat your threshold tests every 4 to 6 weeks to show the gains that you're making. Thanks a lot for tuning in, guys. Coach Jim, we'll talk to you later with another educational topic.